a steaming cup, beside a body gone cold. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing this community grow. Hearing from you makes every mystery worth sharing. Let's begin. If you've ever shared a roof with Nero Wolfe, you know that breakfast isn't just a meal, it's a ceremony. The man doesn't so much eat eggs as negotiate them, and God help you if you speak before the coffee's poured. So when the bell rang at 9:20 that morning, sharp enough to wake the orchids 3 floors up, I had to make a choice. Answer it, or risk Wolfe's glare for letting it ring twice. I decided to live dangerously. Fritz was in the kitchen doing something poetic with cream and cinnamon, and Wolfe was behind his morning fortress, the Times, the Gazette, and that expression he reserves for mankind at large. I opened the door, expecting a delivery or a lost tourist. Instead, in stepped the kind of woman who could make a room forget what it was doing. She was maybe 35, dressed in what you'd call confident grey, tailored, quiet, expensive. Her eyes were the kind that didn't blink without reason. She said, "I need to see Mr. Wolfe." "Most people do," I told her. "Few survive the experience before lunch." "Name and nature?" "Claire Tolland," she said, "and it's a matter of urgency." The name tickled something faint in my memory. Society pages, maybe. Something about a charitable foundation and a messy divorce. I gave her the once-over and decided she looked more like urgency than charity. "Well, Miss Tolland, you're in luck. He's in, vertical and conscious, though that last part's still under debate." I led her to the office. Wolfe looked up at her the way a cat looks at a bird it has no immediate intention of eating. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I've come about a death, but not the kind the police care about." That line cracked through the morning like a bad chord. Wolfe set down his cup, deliberately, meaning it was serious, and said, "Explain." She sat. Her hands were steady, but her voice had a thread in it. "It's my business partner, Owen Lark. He's alive, for now, but he's dying. Reputation first, perhaps body later. Someone's destroying him. Anonymous leaks, false contracts, a stolen letter. And this morning, someone sent me a photograph of him asleep at his desk with a cup of coffee beside him, and a note that said, 'Next time, colder.' That was the moment the name of the story clicked in my head, though I didn't know yet it was a title. Wolfe grunted, low and non-committal. "Madam, this house is not a police annex, nor a sentimental refuge. Why come to me? Because whoever is behind this knows me, knows my habits, my associates, and because yesterday morning I found my spare office key on your stoop." I caught Wolfe's eyes flicker, briefly, but enough for me to note it. A key on our stoop. That was new. She went on. "I thought it was coincidence, until the note came." Wolfe leaned back, fingers touching like twin bridges. "A trespass, literal or figurative, upon my premises is an irritant. I dislike irritants." That was Wolfe, for I'm interested. I said, "Let me guess. You want us to find who's warming your coffee before they serve it cold?" Her gaze didn't flinch. "Exactly, and before they decide to serve it to me." When she left, Wolfe didn't move for a full minute. The air hung with that kind of stillness that means thinking is happening on a higher frequency. Finally, he said, "Archie, locate Mr. Owen Lark. Determine whether he is, in fact, still among the living." "You think she's pulling a fast one?" "I think," he said, reaching for his orchids, "someone has already pulled one and left fingerprints on my morning." Archie Goodwin here, reporting from the war front of civility and caffeine. 10 minutes after Claire Tolland left the brownstone, I was in my coat, notebook in pocket, and skepticism fully loaded. Wolfe had issued his orders in that dry, imperial way of his. Ascertain the existence, vitality, and occupation of Mr. Owen Lark. If he is dead, discover by whom. If alive, by what misfortune? Translation: find the man, take his temperature, and see if the lady's story leaks. I took the sedan. Wolfe's, not mine. I wasn't going to spend my own gas on an unknown corpse, cold or otherwise. The morning traffic on 35th was its usual mix of honking philosophy and mechanical despair, but I made it downtown in 20 minutes flat. Locke and Tolland Associates had an office on Madison, one of those polished operations with brass nameplates and receptionists who look allergic to fingerprints. The receptionist's hair was the color of moral compromise, and her eyes had the bored glint of someone who'd seen too many men in gray suits pretending to be important. "Mr. Locke," I said, flashing my best grin. "Archie Goodwin, personal matter." She gave me a look that said personal matters were scheduled 3 days out, then nodded toward the frosted glass door. "He's in. But if you've got a complaint, get in line." I stepped in expecting a confident executive type. Instead, Owen Locke looked like a man who'd spent the night being followed by his conscience. Mid-40s, thinning hair, a shirt that had once believed in ironing. The smell of coffee hung in the air, strong and bitter, and there was indeed a cup beside his elbow. Half drunk, going cold. He looked up. "If you're here about the contracts, talk to Claire." "Not contracts," I said. "Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." The name did its usual magic. His eyes sharpened, and some of the weariness straightened out of his shoulders. "Claire sent you? She mentioned you were in trouble. Something about being dismantled, professionally speaking." He exhaled, sat back, and for a moment, he just stared at the cup as if it might explain things. "She's not wrong. Someone's been feeding doctored files to our board, altered memos, fake correspondence, things I supposedly said or signed. They've hit suppliers, investors, even my wife. It's like I'm being erased, replaced by some invented version of myself. And it's working." "That's a neat trick," I said. "And you've got no idea who's behind it." He hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. "Everyone has a theory. Claire thinks it's our rival in Boston. I think it's someone closer, someone with access." I studied him. The man had the look of guilt without the crime, which is a combination Wolfe usually enjoys dissecting over beef Wellington. "You didn't, by any chance, misplace your office key recently?" His eyes flicked up sharply. "Why do you ask?" "Because Miss Tolland says one turned up on our doorstep yesterday. It's how this whole parade started." That froze him. He pushed back his chair and crossed to a drawer, rummaging, then turned, pale. "It's gone, my spare. I keep it in that box for emergencies." So now we've got a missing key, a string of fakes, and a warning note with a coffee joke. Your enemies are creative. He sat down again. Slower this time. "You think it's a warning?" "I think," I said, "when someone sends you a picture of yourself asleep with a cup beside you and a note that says, 'Next time, colder,' they're not offering you a refill." He gave a humorless laugh. "Then I suppose I should stop drinking coffee." "Not a bad idea," I said. "But for now, just tell me, who would profit if your reputation took the long fall?" He hesitated just a second too long. "No one legitimate." That, in my experience, usually means someone specific. Before I could press, his phone rang. He picked up, listened, and his face drained. "What? Now? All right, I'll be there." He hung up. "The police are at my apartment. They say there's been a break-in. Mind if I tag along?" He gave a bitter smile. "At this point, I'll take any witness I can get." We got there just after 11. Locke lived on East 61st, a respectable building with doormen who pretended curiosity was beneath them. Inside, his apartment was a wreck of expensive furniture and bad intentions. Drawers overturned, papers shredded, and in the middle of it all, a shattered coffee carafe on the floor, its dark stain drying into the carpet like a bad omen. A uniformed officer was making notes. When he saw us, he said, You, Mr. Lark? Nothing taken as far as we can tell, just vandalism. I crouched near the broken glass. The smell hit first. Coffee, strong and deliberate. Then I noticed something else. The rim of the carafe was smeared with a fine, chalky residue. I touched it, sniffed. Not sugar. Lark looked ill. What is it? Maybe nothing, I said, standing. Maybe something that doesn't belong in a breakfast drink. The cop gave me a look that said I was surplus to requirements. Your relative? Associate, I said. Private investigation. He didn't like that, but he didn't argue. I let him jot notes while I took a quiet inventory. The apartment had been searched, but not for valuables, only papers. Whoever did this wanted information, and they wanted it messy enough to send a message. As we left, Lark said quietly, "If this is about Claire, if they're trying to make me turn on her, you think she's involved?" "No," he said too quickly. "No, but someone wants me to." When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was exactly as I'd left him. In his chair, book open, the afternoon sunlight cutting across his desk like it was afraid to touch him. "Well?" he said, without looking up. "Alive," I reported. Barely cheerful, moderately paranoid. His office key is missing, his apartment's been tossed, and someone left enough caffeine evidence to open a diner. Ah. Wolfe closed the book, precisely. The trespass deepens. More like curdles. Whoever's behind this knows both of them, knows how to get under their skin. He sighed, which in Wolfe terms is practically an outburst. "Archie, arrange for Mr. Lark to visit me here this evening. I wish to observe his manner and Miss Tolland's reaction to it." "Dinner-time showdown?" "Observation, not confrontation," he said. "Yet." I nodded. "And if they won't come?" "Then," he said, "we will invite them to dine. Fritz will prepare something persuasive." That was Wolfe's version of escalation. Someone had brought their malice to our doorstep, and he was about to return the favor with logic, conversation, and possibly veal ragout. I left him there, the orchids faintly glowing behind the glass, and thought about that photograph. The cup beside a sleeping man, the warning written in someone's calm, deliberate hand. Wolfe once said that threats are the poetry of the incompetent, but this one felt different. It wasn't a bluff. It was a prelude. By 7 that evening, the brownstone had the feel of a room waiting for an argument. Fritz had set out hors d'oeuvres no one would touch. The orchids upstairs were probably gossiping about the guest list, and Wolfe was behind his desk, radiating the kind of stillness that made clocks nervous. I'd called both Claire Tolland and Owen Lark, and both had agreed, reluctantly, to come. I didn't tell either one the other would be present. Wolfe enjoys the element of surprise in conversation the way a chess player enjoys the moment before checkmate. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Claire first. She looked sharper this time, no tremor, no uncertainty. Her suit was black and unyielding, her expression clipped from marble. She followed me into the office and gave Wolfe a polite nod. "You said you had progress?" "Not progress," Wolfe said. "A condition." She frowned slightly. "Condition?" Before I could elaborate, the bell rang again. Timing like that doesn't happen by accident. It's choreography, and Wolfe had written the steps. I brought in Lark. The moment he saw Claire, he stopped dead, eyes flicking between her and Wolfe. "You didn't tell me." "Mr. Lark," Wolfe said smoothly, "your discomfort is unnecessary. Sit." He did, stiffly, and Claire followed suit, her poise cracking just enough to show she hadn't expected this either. I took my usual chair by the globe stand, notebook in hand, pretending to be invisible while Wolfe rearranged reality. "Miss Tolland," he began, "this morning you presented a narrative, a series of attacks upon your partner's reputation, and a peculiar intrusion upon my property. Mr. Lark corroborates portions of this, yet there are elements which remain discordant. Lark bristled. If this is some test, it is always a test, sir, Wolfe interrupted. Of coherence, of motive, of temperament. You, for example, have been accused without evidence, yet your response has been defensive rather than outraged. Why? Lark's jaw tightened. Because outrage doesn't fix forged contracts or poisoned rumors. Precisely, Wolfe said. You are a pragmatist. Miss Tolland, however, is not. She met his gaze, steady. You think I'm behind this? I think you are behind your own blindness. Someone has turned your enterprise into a stage, and you are reading lines written for you. My question is simple. Who benefits from your mutual destruction? That stopped both of them. They looked at each other, then away, the air thickening. I could almost hear Wolfe smiling inwardly. Finally, Claire said, There's our silent partner, Evan Dar. He controls distribution. He's been restless. Lark nodded slowly. He's wanted full control for months. We refused, but he doesn't have access to our internal documents. Unless, Wolfe said mildly, he has assistance. That landed like a brick. Claire turned on Lark. You think I helped him? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. You've met with him privately, he said. Twice last week. She flushed. Because I was trying to keep him calm. He threatened to pull funding. I watched Wolfe's eyes half close, the way they do when he's mapping out the next 10 moves. Mr. Goodwin, he said, what did you observe at Mr. Lark's residence? The break-in wasn't random, I said. They wanted papers, not valuables. But the real message was in the coffee. Someone poured a pot, spiked it with something chalky, then smashed the carafe for effect. A warning, not a murder attempt. Yet. Claire inhaled sharply. That's sick. Indeed, Wolfe said. But logical. Whoever staged that scene wanted Mr. Lark fearful, not dead. Fear clouds judgment. It breeds error. Lark leaned forward. If Dar's behind this, what's his next step? Wolfe steepled his fingers. Possibly nothing. He may already have succeeded in what he wanted. Division between you. I saw it then, the calculation behind Wolfe's stillness. He wasn't just observing them, he was measuring the distance between them, the way a surveyor measures fault lines. Archie, he said suddenly, make an appointment with Mr. Evan Dar for tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Inform him that Miss Tolland and Mr. Lark have retained my services in a matter of mutual concern. Claire blinked. You think he'll come? He will, Wolfe said. Curiosity compels the guilty. When they left, Wolfe remained quiet for a long time. The air smelled faintly of Fritz's herbs and tension. Finally, he spoke. Archie, our trespasser, whoever left that key, did not act carelessly. They sought my attention. That is presumptuous. Maybe they knew it'd get it, he grunted. Presumption and intelligence are not the same. Whoever it is, they have an appetite for theater. The key, the note, the photograph. All staged, a mind that delights in symbol, which narrows it down to every manipulative egotist in New York. He actually smiled at that. Barely. Egotism is a spectrum. Find me the origin of that photograph. Determine who developed or transmitted it. I suspect it will lead us closer to the author of this drama. I left him then and went to my desk in the front room, dialing contacts like a man tossing pebbles into deep water. By 10, I had a bite, a lab downtown that handled photo processing for several corporate clients. A name came up, Verity Studios. Claire Tolland's firm used them for advertising layouts. By the time I relayed this to Wolfe, he was halfway through his beer, an act that in itself meant he was pleased. Verity Studios, he repeated. Appropriate. Truth packaged for sale. I said, You think our mystery photographer works there? I think, Wolfe said, that truth often begins with artifice. Tomorrow you will visit the studio. Speak with whoever handles their confidential work. Use your judgment, Archie, though sparingly." He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "Someone has touched my threshold and left a token. I mean to discover why." I left him there, silent in the fading light, orchids glowing like sentinels behind glass. Outside, Manhattan had started its nightly hum, that low urban vibration that says secrets are being traded for sleep. I stood at the door a moment longer than usual before locking it. Something about this case, its precision, its performance, felt off. The danger wasn't in the crime itself, but in the choreography. Someone was writing a play, and Wolfe and I had just stepped on stage without knowing our lines. The next morning started with fog, both the literal kind and the mental variety. Wolfe was still upstairs, communing with his orchids when I finished breakfast, which meant I had a clear runway to start the day's work. I was due at Verity Studios by 9:30, and judging by the name, I expected a place where truth got airbrushed and billed by the hour. The studio was in Midtown, tucked between a tailor and a printing shop, its lobby decorated with framed magazine covers and egos disguised as art. The receptionist, a redhead who had decided lipstick could compensate for patience, looked up when I gave her my best professional grin. "Verity Studios," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "Not the kind you'd find on a calendar," I told her. "Name's Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into some photo work done recently for Lark and Tolland Associates." That got me a blink, then the kind of pause where she calculated how much trouble it would be to tell me to leave. "One moment," she said finally, and disappeared behind a frosted door. When she returned, she was followed by a man who could have stepped out of an ad for cologne, trim suit, slick hair, and the confidence of someone who used mirrors like caffeine. "Ray Gifford," he said, shaking my hand with the enthusiasm of a salesman about to close a deal. "You mentioned Lark and Tolland." "Right," I said. "Specifically a photograph of Mr. Lark asleep at his desk. It was sent anonymously. We're trying to trace where it was developed." He frowned slightly, though not as much as an innocent man would. "We handle all kinds of promotional material for them, but nothing like that." "Sounds intrusive." "Sure does," I said. "You process your own film here?" "We do. But everything's logged by client, date, and reference. If you have a copy of the image, I could tell you whether it passed through us." I handed him a print Wolfe had given me that morning. He'd had it developed by Saul Panzer overnight. Gifford took it with a studied calm that didn't quite hide the flicker in his eyes. He held it to the light, hummed once, then said, "This is high-quality work. Sharp depth, subdued lighting. Whoever took it knew what they were doing. Any of your staff fit that description?" He smiled faintly. "All of them. That's why they work here. The dodge was neat, but I've seen neater. You mind checking your log anyway?" "Of course not." He disappeared again, and I used the time to look around. The walls were lined with client photos, ads, portraits, glossy campaigns that screamed confidence. One frame stood out, a black and white of a woman in a sharply cut dress, holding a coffee cup. The signature at the bottom read, "Claire Tolland for Verity, 312. When Gifford returned, he was smiling too smoothly. "Nothing in our system matches that print," he said. "Sorry." "Don't be," I said. "You've been very helpful. I'll tell Mr. Wolfe you tried." He paused just long enough to show that the name had landed. "Nero Wolfe?" "The one who doesn't leave the house," I said. "You might have heard of him." That cracked the veneer. He nodded once, suddenly less polished. "If you're working for Wolfe, tell him to tread carefully. Lark and Tolland aren't the only ones with skin in this." I didn't press. Some doors open better when you wait. I thanked him, left my card, and got out before he changed his mind about liking me. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was finishing his morning beer, reading the Gazette with the mild disgust he reserves for human behavior in print. "Well," he said as I entered. "Verity's clean on paper," I said. But the manager, Ray Gifford, knew more than he wanted to say, and get this. Claire Tolland's photos hanging on their wall, advertising shot dated 3 weeks ago. Wolfe's brows lifted a fraction. So she has prior dealings with them beyond corporate work. Looks that way. He said the photograph of Lark never came through their system, but his pulse said otherwise. Indeed. Wolfe set down his glass and leaned back, fingertips touching. Mr. Gifford is not a fool. If he is concealing information, it is not from fear of us. It is because he fears someone else. Maybe Dar, I suggested. Lark and Tolland both painted him as the ambitious type. Wolfe made a low sound that could have meant anything from agreement to indigestion. "Mr. Dar will be here within the hour. Fritz is preparing consommé and restraint." That was Wolfe's way of saying the man was about to be interrogated over soup. At 11 sharp, Saul Panzer called. He'd done his own digging. "Ray Gifford's not just a photo manager," he told me. "Used to work in private intelligence, specialized in corporate leaks, blackmail recovery. Quit after a case went bad 2 years ago. Guess who his client was?" "Don't tell me. Lark and Tolland." Bingo, and Evan Dar paid him off quietly afterward. I hung up just as the bell rang. Wolfe gestured for me to admit the visitor, and in stepped Dar, tall, sleek, and radiating charm like a snake wearing cologne. "Mr. Wolfe," he said smoothly, taking a chair before he was offered one. "Claire told me you were looking into this unpleasantness. I came to assure you it's being handled internally." Wolfe's eyes were half-lidded. "Indeed, your concern for discretion is touching. Yet I wonder why a financier should fear daylight." Dar smiled without humor. "Because light attracts scavengers. You of all people must appreciate the value of silence." "I do," Wolfe said, "especially when it conceals deceit." Dar's smile faltered for half a breath, then returned. "If Claire and Owen have convinced you I'm responsible for their troubles, I'll save you time. I'm not. They've been collapsing under their own incompetence for months." "Possibly," Wolfe said mildly. "Though I find it curious that your name recurs whenever money changes direction." Dar stood abruptly, temper flashing beneath the charm. "If you're implying, I imply nothing," Wolfe said. "I infer." Dar's jaw flexed, but he didn't reply. He just nodded once and left, the door shutting hard behind him. When the silence settled, Wolfe muttered, "The man reeks of calculation and insecurity, a dangerous blend." "Think he's our guy?" "Perhaps, but he lacks artistry. The hand behind this prefers elegance." I thought of the photograph again, the composition, the lighting, the precision. "You mean someone like a professional photographer?" "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Mr. Gifford's former profession makes him capable. His connection to Dar provides motive, and his discretion suggests complicity." He rose, which for Wolfe meant the case had moved from irritation to engagement. "Archie, arrange another visit to Verity. This time, take Saul." Quietly, if Mr. Gifford is part of this masquerade, he will betray himself when pressure is applied. He sat again, closing his eyes briefly. Someone has used my doorstep as a stage. I will now write their final act. I didn't argue. Outside, the fog had lifted, but inside the air felt thicker. For once, it wasn't just the orchids breathing. It was the case itself, alive and tightening. Saul Panzer and I didn't usually need a full game plan. Half a sentence from Wolfe and we understood each other. By the next morning we had one. Simple on paper, messy in practice. Saul would go in first to Verity Studios, posing as a client, looking for discreet work. I'd follow 20 minutes later under my own name, casual as a tourist. The idea was to see how Gifford reacted to both visits, especially once the conversation turned towards certain photographs he wasn't supposed to know existed. At 9:15, Saul parked his car across the street from Verity and went in. I watched from a diner window with a newspaper I wasn't reading and coffee I didn't like. Through the glass, I caught glimpses of him. Businesslike, polite, doing his best impression of a man whose money outranked his morals. He stayed 20 minutes, came out, gave me a short nod, the signal that Gifford had taken the bait, and drove off. I went in at 9:40, the door chime giving me a polite announcement like I was entering a church for sinners with good lighting. The redhead at reception remembered me, or maybe just my tie. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, cool as yesterday's coffee. "Mr. Gifford's with a client." "I'll wait," I said, and helped myself to a seat. The place was humming, assistants moving lights, someone arguing about contrast, the usual background noise of artistic panic. 5 minutes later, Gifford appeared from his office, crisp as before, but carrying a trace of irritation he hadn't worn yesterday. "Goodwin," he said, "back so soon? I hope you're not accusing me of double exposure." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said, "though it seems you've been popular this morning. Friend of mine stopped by, Saul Panzer. Ring a bell?" The look he gave me could have curdled glass. "Panzer? Yeah, nice guy. He mentioned needing confidential photography for an upcoming settlement case. You wouldn't happen to have offered him a discount, would you?" He smiled thinly. "We don't give discounts for paranoia." "Good, because the last guy who tried to blackmail a client through his own studio files found the margin too thin. That did it." He glanced toward the inner door, the one leading to the dark room, and then back at me. "If you're suggesting I'm involved in anything illegal, you're wasting your time." "Maybe," I said, leaning against the counter. "But here's what isn't a waste. A copy of that photograph exists. Maybe more than one. Whoever took it used equipment you own, on film stock you process, and lighting that matches your catalog work. Now, either someone here freelances without permission, or you've got bigger problems than poor clientele." He started to say something, stopped, then exhaled. "You don't know what you're walking into, Goodwin. This isn't just about a picture." "Then make me smarter," I said. "Who's pulling your strings?" His voice dropped. "You think you're chasing a saboteur, but you're chasing a cover-up. Dar's involved, yes, but he's not the one giving orders." I kept my tone easy. "Try me." "Claire," he said. The name landed like a coin dropped into silence. Claire Tolland hired me 6 months ago to gather leverage on her own partner. She said it was precautionary. She didn't trust Lark's decisions. The photograph was meant as proof that he was compromised, sleeping on company time, distracted, negligent. But someone intercepted it before she could destroy it. Someone decided to use it. I let that sink in. "You're telling me she started this fire and someone else poured the gas?" "Exactly. She wanted protection. Dar wanted power. I was stuck in the middle." "And the key left on our doorstep?" He shook his head. "That wasn't me. But whoever did that knew Wolfe would bite. They wanted him involved. Wanted this to play out in public." That last part had Wolfe's brand of deduction written all over it, though I didn't like the taste of it coming from Gifford. Before I could ask more, one of his assistants entered, pale and urgent. "Ray, there's police downstairs. They say they need to talk about the incident at your apartment." Gifford stiffened. "What incident?" "Break-in," the assistant said. "They said it looks recent." He turned to me, eyes suddenly sharp. "You think this is coincidence?" I didn't. I followed him out, down 2 flights, and sure enough, 2 uniforms were waiting in the lobby. One of them recognized me. Sergeant Stebbins, who'd been roped into Wolfe's adventures before. He gave me the look of a man who wished he'd called in sick. "Goodwin," he said, "I should have known you'd be orbiting this circus." Your friend here just made our morning report. I didn't know we were friends, Gifford muttered. Stebbins ignored him. Neighbor reported his door open around 6, place tossed. We found a note on the kitchen table. You might find it cute. He held up a plastic sleeve with a folded paper inside. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, the message short. Bitter or sweet, depends who drinks first. Gifford swore softly. I'm being framed. Join the club, I said. You, Lark, and Tolland are running neck and neck. By the time we wrapped it up, the air had gone thick with implication. Gifford insisted he'd go down to the precinct voluntarily. Stebbins looked at me. You'll tell Wolfe about this, won't you? Try stopping me, I said. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was exactly where physics dictated he would be. Seated, unflappable, a small mountain of logic surrounded by books. I relayed the morning in full, from Saul's reconnaissance to Gifford's confession and the note that smelled like psychological warfare. When I finished, Wolfe stayed silent long enough for the radiator to complain. Then, Claire Tolland deceived us. Looks like it, I said, but she didn't strike me as malicious, just desperate. Desperation is the mother of malice, Wolfe said. She engaged Gifford for intelligence, lost control of the result, and now her fabrication has grown teeth. Dar manipulates, Gifford conceals, Lark suffers, and someone anonymous, directs the composition. You think there's a fourth player? He nodded once. The precision of the intrusions, the symmetry of the clues, they suggest a hand detached from motive, a craftsman of chaos. I intend to expose him. He closed his eyes briefly, thinking, then said, Call Miss Tolland. Inform her that I must see her and Mr. Lark together this evening. Tell her the charade is over. That tone meant dinner would be served with confessions. I made the calls. Both agreed, though Claire's voice was strained and Lark's was brittle as glass. As evening fell, Fritz began setting the dining room, and I could feel it, the quiet before the strike. Wolfe's trap wasn't physical, it was verbal geometry. He'd built the lines, and soon he'd make them converge. Before the guests arrived, Wolfe spoke again, softly. Archie, when they enter, watch their eyes, not their words. The guilty will already know the ending. I nodded, checking my notebook. I didn't know yet who'd planned this elaborate ruin, but Wolfe was right about one thing. The curtain was about to lift, and none of them were ready for the act he'd written. By 8 that evening, the brownstone felt charged, like a storm cloud pretending to be a house. The orchids upstairs were safe from it, but the air downstairs was heavy with what Wolfe calls human consequence. Fritz had arranged the room as if expecting royalty, which in our line of work meant suspects in decent clothes. Wolfe sat behind his desk, hands folded on the blotter, his eyes half closed in what looked like indifference but wasn't. I answered the door to find Claire first. She came in briskly, almost defiant, her expression suggesting she'd rehearsed calm and overdid it. Behind her, 15 minutes later, Owen Lark arrived, hollow-eyed, rumpled, and carrying the kind of tension you can't iron out. When I seated them opposite each other, Wolfe spoke for the first time. Miss Tolland, Mr. Lark, thank you for coming. We shall forego amenities. The time for courtesy has expired. Lark frowned. You said you had something urgent. I do, Wolfe said. Your predicament, Mr. Lark, has evolved from inconvenience to orchestration. You are both being directed by unseen hands, one manipulative, the other frightened. Claire's chin lifted. If this is about Gifford, it is about truth, Wolfe cut in. Mr. Gifford has confessed to photographing Mr. Lark at your behest. She froze. That's not, it is, Wolfe said mildly, entirely consistent with his temperament and his former occupation. You engaged him to collect leverage. His account is corroborated by evidence, the film type, the lighting, and the printing format. The photograph was yours. The question, therefore, is not whether you initiated the deception, but how it was turned against you. Lark leaned forward, voice sharp. You mean she started all this? Claire turned on him, eyes fierce. Don't twist this, Owen. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was trying to protect the company. From you, from your mistakes. My mistakes? He shot back. You were the one hiding invoices, taking meetings with Dar behind my back. Enough, Wolfe said quietly, and the silence that followed was absolute. You see how easily division grows when truth is left to rot. Now, Miss Tolland, you will answer concisely. Why did you hire Gifford? Her shoulders sagged a little. I thought Owen was being manipulated. He was meeting suppliers without telling me, cutting corners, ignoring approvals. I wanted proof before confronting him, but Gifford didn't just take one picture. He kept copies. He said they might be useful later. And when they surfaced, Wolfe asked. I confronted him. He claimed Dar had them. I didn't know what to believe. Wolfe nodded slowly, as though ticking boxes on an invisible ledger. And yet, he murmured, the keys. That got her attention. What about them? Your spare office key was found on my doorstep, he said, placed there deliberately by someone who wished to involve me. Neither of you would have dared. Gifford lacked motive. Dar, he thrives on advantage, not exposure, which leaves us a participant yet unnamed. I noticed then what Wolfe had already caught. Lark's fingers drumming on his knee, the small tick of a man trying to hide comprehension. Mr. Lark, Wolfe said softly, you received the first threat, the note reading, next time colder. Did you destroy it? He hesitated. Yes. Why? Because it frightened my wife. Wolfe opened his eyes fully, sharp and bright. You mean it frightened you? A reasonable reaction for a man who already knew what it referred to. Lark swallowed. You're implying what? Sent it to myself? I imply nothing, Wolfe said. I deduce that your fear is performative. You were aware of Gifford's surveillance long before Miss Tolland was. You staged your own victimhood to force her reliance on you and to deflect suspicion from a separate misdeed. That's absurd, Lark snapped. I could tell Wolfe was warming up. He spoke now with the smooth, deliberate rhythm of a man slicing facts into confession-sized pieces. Mr. Lark, your financial records reveal several discrepancies. Payments routed through subsidiary accounts under your name but benefiting Mr. Dar's private holding. When Miss Tolland refused to authorize a merger, you needed leverage. Gifford's photograph provided it. You had him send it anonymously to her, accompanied by a warning. The key on my doorstep was insurance, meant to draw in an external observer, one who could later be blamed if your deception unraveled. Unfortunately for you, I dislike manipulation. Lark's face drained, then hardened. You think you can accuse me of blackmail based on conjecture? Conjecture? Wolfe's eyebrows rose. Hardly. Mr. Gifford's apartment was ransacked yesterday. A note was left, one that mirrors your first threat, in tone and phrasing. Yet the residue found on your coffee carafe, which I had analyzed, contains sodium chlorate, an oxidizer used in photographic bleaching. You are a businessman, not a chemist, but Gifford is both. Which means the chemical reached your home through deliberate placement by someone with access to both the studio and your schedule. That, Mr. Lark, was you. Lark started to rise, then stopped himself, caught between fury and collapse. You can't prove that. I can, Wolfe said, voice almost gentle, because I already have. He gestured slightly, and I opened the door. Saul Panzer stepped in, holding an envelope. Inside were two photographs, one of Lark at his desk, the other, newly developed, of him entering Verity Studios late at night 3 days prior. Both from the same camera, both taken by someone with the password to Gifford's after-hours lab. Saul had found the security log himself. Claire stared at Lark, her anger curdling into something smaller. "You used me?" Lark didn't answer. His shoulders sagged. The fight gone. "I didn't mean for it to spiral." "Dar promised," Wolfe cut him off. "Spare me the justifications. Your ambition exceeded your intellect, and your deceit outpaced your control. Mr. Goodwin will deliver this evidence to Inspector Kramer. Whether you are charged with conspiracy or simple fraud will depend on how efficiently you cooperate." Silence again, deep and final. Claire sat motionless, eyes glassy but dry. Wolfe turned to her. "You are foolish, not wicked. But folly, too, demands a price." When they left, the brownstone exhaled. Fritz appeared with coffee, and Wolfe took his cup with the satisfaction of a man reclaiming order. "Well," I said, "you sure rearranged their morals." He sipped thoughtfully. "Morals rearrange themselves, Archie. I merely supplied the geometry." I leaned against the doorframe. "And the key on our stoop?" Wolfe's gaze lifted, distant but knowing. "That remains a curiosity. Someone wanted to test me, see if I could be baited." I obliged. He reached for his book. "The world, Mr. Goodwin, is full of players who mistake cunning for intelligence. It is our good fortune that they so often invite correction." I said, "And your good fortune that Fritz's coffee never goes cold." He didn't look up, but one corner of his mouth twitched. The case was closed, the brownstone quiet again. Outside, the city hummed on, and inside, peace had returned. The kind that only comes after someone else's chaos has been tidied into logic and sent politely to prison. It was nearing 10 when the last echo of the front door faded, and the brownstone began its slow return to silence. Fritz cleared the dishes with funereal precision, and I poured myself a coffee, hot, black, and earned. Wolfe hadn't moved an inch since Claire and Lark had left, though the slight upward tilt of his head meant he was still turning the puzzle over in that oversized brain of his. I gave him a few minutes before asking the question that had been itching since his final remark. "You still thinking about that key?" He nodded once, slow as a pendulum. "Yes. The key was not placed by any of the principals. It was too deliberate. An invitation, not a mistake. Someone sought to lure me, to observe my method, an experiment. An admirer, maybe." He grimaced. "Admiration is a form of trespass, Archie. Flattery disguised as intrusion. I prefer my solitude undisturbed." "Then who would be curious enough to bait you?" "That," he said, "is what disturbs me." The clock ticked softly, and for a long minute the only sound was the faint clink of porcelain as Fritz polished a cup somewhere beyond the door. Then the phone rang. I crossed to answer it. "Goodwin." The voice on the other end was Saul Panza's, steady but carrying a weight it didn't usually have. "Archie, I just got word from a friend at Homicide. Ray Gifford's dead." That hit harder than I'd admit. "How?" "Gas leak, supposedly, in his studio office. But the timing's too neat." I turned toward Wolfe. "You hear that?" He didn't move, but the air changed around him. "Details," he said quietly. Saul continued. "Preliminary says he was found this evening. Police think accidental ignition, but his assistant swears he'd left early. And get this." The note on his desk read, "Truth expires quickly." That was enough to make me sit down. "That doesn't sound like an accident." "No," Saul said. "It sounds like cleanup." "Stay close to it," I told him. "If Kramer's there, keep him from doing anything rash." "Too late for that," Saul said grimly. "Kramer's already asking how Wolfe's name got dragged into this. Thought you'd want to know before he calls you in for a chat." I hung up and turned back to Wolfe. "So much for the curtain call. Looks like someone rewrote the ending." He exhaled through his nose. "I anticipated a sequel," he murmured, "not a postscript." He sat forward slightly, which for Wolfe was the equivalent of alarm. "Archie, the note, truth expires quickly." That is not the voice of a man silenced by fear. It is the voice of an author finishing his work. "You think Gifford staged his own death?" "No, but whoever killed him wished to preserve the illusion that he had completed his purpose, which means the real architect remains at liberty. That narrows it down to, what, one manipulative financier with an ego problem?" "Da," Wolfe said softly. "Yes, he had motive, means, and access to the studio. But his temperament, he is impulsive, not poetic. The phraseology of these notes, the symbolism of the coffee and the key, they suggest an intellect capable of irony." He paused, frowning. "Someone close to observation, someone who studies cause and effect for sport." That's when it hit me. "Claire." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "Think about it," I said. "She hires Gifford, plays the victim, orchestrates her own distress. The leaks, the pictures, even the planted key, it all draws you in. She wanted Wolfe's validation, to prove she could manipulate even you into restoring her control." He was silent for a long time, long enough for the radiator to hiss like it was weighing in. Finally he said, "Possible. But why risk Gifford's death?" "Because he became a liability. He knew she'd started the whole game. Maybe he threatened exposure." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Archie, contact Saul again. Have him learn whether Miss Tollin visited Verity Studios today, or placed any calls to it. Discretion is imperative." I moved to the phone without question. Saul answered on the first ring. 10 minutes later, he called back. "Confirmed. Building log. Shows Claire signed in at 3 this afternoon. Stayed 20 minutes. I hung up slowly. Wolfe's lips pressed together like a man closing a door on his own temper. "So?" he said softly. "The play was hers from the start." He leaned back, eyes half closed. "She engineered chaos to destroy her partner, used Dar's greed as cover, and sacrificed Gifford when his usefulness ended. And when the mess grew too large, she placed the key on my doorstep to transfer authorship of the drama." I said, "She wanted you to clean it up, tie the bow, and give her absolution." "Precisely, and I did." He closed his eyes again, the weight of the admission hanging in the room. "A clever woman, Archie, but careless in one regard." "What's that?" "She believes intellect absolves motive. It does not. It only refines it." He reached for his beer, taking a slow sip. "Tomorrow we shall inform Inspector Kramer that the case he considers closed has merely reached its second act." Outside, the city hummed its sleepless rhythm, indifferent as ever. Inside, the brownstone settled back into its measured quiet, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt suspended, like a thought Wolfe hadn't finished yet, and I knew better than to think he wouldn't. Morning light came slow through the brownstone's windows, yellow and quiet, like it was trying not to wake the house. I was already up, which gave me the rare privilege of seeing Wolfe's orchids before their owner emerged from upstairs to commune with them. He didn't appear until nearly 10, and when he did, he was composed but irritable, the way he gets when a problem refuses to fit his grid. "Any word from Kramer?" I asked, handing him the morning papers. "None," he said, lowering himself into his chair. "Which means he either knows too much or too little. Both are intolerable." Fritz appeared with his breakfast tray, retreating like a man who understood the risks of interrupting thought. Wolfe ate in silence. When the coffee was gone, he looked up. "Archie, we must revisit Miss Tollin's role, but delicately. She will come to us again. Guilt compels confession. Until then, we prod Kramer." "Prod?" "He doesn't like being prodded." "He likes being outwitted even less," Wolfe said. The phone rang just as he finished speaking, proving the universe occasionally pays attention. I answered. "Goodwin." It was Kramer himself, sounding like gravel soaked in vinegar. "Tell Wolfe to stop stirring the ashes. Gifford's death was accidental. Gas line rupture, confirmed by the lab. Lab could confirm Santa Claus if someone greased the right palm, I said. That's cute, he snapped. But this isn't your circus anymore. Wolfe's name came up enough times to make me nervous. If he knows something, he'd better share it before I decide obstruction suits him. I passed the phone to Wolfe, who took it like a man accepting an unwanted invitation. Inspector, he said calmly, you presume I have withheld something. I have not. You, however, have accepted a conclusion that is convenient rather than correct. I'm not in the mood for lectures, Wolfe. A man's dead, and unless you've got evidence of foul play, stay out of it. I intend to do precisely the opposite, Wolfe said. Your accident lacks one crucial element: motive. Men do not die neatly for convenience. Someone arranged it to appear so, and that, Inspector, is a challenge I will not ignore. He hung up before Kramer could explode, then turned to me. He will come. Pride ensures it. He was right. 3 hours later, Kramer stormed into the office without knocking, hat in hand and temper barely leashed. All right, genius. Explain this nonsense about motive. Wolfe didn't rise. He merely gestured toward the red chair. Sit. You will not enjoy it standing. I took notes because someone had to, though Kramer's expression said he'd rather be somewhere with fewer syllables. Wolfe began with the precision of a scalpel. Ray Gifford was a conduit, a man between powerful egos. Miss Tolland used him, Mr. Lark manipulated him, Mr. Darr exploited both. But none benefited from his death. Therefore, one must ask who required his silence permanently. Not because of past deeds, but future inconvenience. Kramer grunted. You're saying someone thought Gifford might talk? Precisely. The phrasing of his final note, truth expires quickly, was not suicide, but mockery. A signature, perhaps. Miss Tolland's phrasing in her correspondence reveals similar linguistic patterns, concise, ironic, deliberate. I suspect she penned that note after arranging the explosion. That's a hell of an accusation, Kramer said. It is an inference supported by pattern, Wolfe replied evenly. She has demonstrated both intellect and moral elasticity. She would not soil her hands directly, but she could ensure opportunity. Kramer rubbed his forehead. You've got anything solid or just philosophy? Solid enough, Wolfe said. Archie. I handed over a folder. Saul's latest work. Building maintenance logs from Verity Studios. Gas line was inspected last week. No issues. But the valve key used to access it was signed out yesterday by one C. Tolland, who claimed it was for a shoot requiring controlled flame effects. The guard verified her identity. Kramer's jaw set. You sure this isn't planted? Planted evidence is rarely accompanied by corroborating witness statements, Wolfe said. She will deny it, of course, but you will find traces of the same oxidizer on her gloves or in her car. She handled the tools herself, or supervised their use. Either way, she is culpable. Kramer stood, exhaling like a furnace. All right, I'll pick her up. But if this blows up in my face, Wolfe, it already has, Inspector, Wolfe murmured. We are merely confirming the temperature. When he left, the house fell quiet again. I poured another coffee and leaned against the desk. You think she'll crack? She already has, Wolfe said. A woman who orchestrates control cannot abide disorder. Once confronted, she will speak, to reclaim authorship. He leaned back, eyes half closed. In her mind, this was art, a narrative of power and precision, but she forgot that art without restraint is vandalism. He looked toward the orchids, their colors vivid in the afternoon light. When Kramer calls to confirm her confession, remind him, some crimes are not solved. They are admitted out of exhaustion. I nodded, though I knew he wasn't talking to me anymore. Wolfe had already withdrawn into the stillness he preferred after victory. Half thought, half silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind the echo of one truth he'd never say aloud: that every game he wins costs him a little more interest in playing. The call came just before midnight. I'd been half dozing in the front room, still dressed, because experience had taught me that when Wolfe started talking about exhaustion and art, it meant he expected confirmation before morning. The phone startled the silence, and I grabbed it on the second ring. "Goodwin," I said. Kramer's voice came through, rough and clipped, the kind of tone he uses when he's both impressed and angry. "We've got her. Wolfe was right. Again." "Claire?" "Yeah, she cracked after 2 hours. Claimed Gifford's death was an accident at first. Then started unraveling. Said she only meant to scare him. You can tell Wolfe his precious intellect pegged it to the letter. Thanks, Inspector. He'll be delighted, which for him means his eyebrows will move half an inch." "Tell him not to gloat too much," Kramer said. She was calm about it, almost proud. Said she'd done it for justice, that Lark and Dar had ruined everything she'd built. Didn't sound like a woman begging forgiveness. "That fits," I said. "She was never after mercy. She just wanted to win." Kramer grunted. "Yeah, well, now she gets to explain that philosophy to a judge. Good night, Goodwin." I hung up and turned toward the office. Wolfe was there, of course. Still in his chair, a book open but unread. He didn't need to ask. He could read the result on my face. "She confessed," I said. "Said it was an accident, then changed her tune. Claimed it was justice." "Ah," Wolfe murmured. "Justice, the perennial refuge of vanity." He closed the book with care, setting it aside. "So ends the matter." "Neatly tied," I said, though I'd call it more of a hangman's knot than a bow. He didn't smile. "Justice rarely flatters. It merely restores proportion." I sat down across from him. "You ever think you attract these people on purpose, the ones who treat deceit like performance art?" "That is the inevitable consequence of discernment," he said. "Fools seek flattery. Cunning minds seek challenge. I'm convenient to both." "Comforting," I said. "You're practically a civic utility." He ignored that and reached for his beer. The foam settled as he spoke, each word measured like an ingredient in Fritz's kitchen. Miss Tolland's misfortune was not her intellect. It was her failure to restrain it. She mistook comprehension for entitlement. She believed that because she understood men, she could govern them. "She managed for a while," I said. "Indeed," Wolfe replied. "Until she met one she could not manipulate, Mr. Gifford. His conscience offended her. She silenced it." He took a slow sip, then glanced at me. "Does it trouble you, Archie?" "Which part? That she killed him or that she made it look like a clever metaphor?" "Either." I thought about it. "Not really. What gets me is how easy she made it look, like she'd been rehearsing the line her whole life." Wolfe nodded once, approving the observation like a teacher grading a competent essay. "Habit, Mr. Goodwin. It is the quietest form of corruption." The room went still again. Outside, traffic murmured against the windows. Fritz appeared at the doorway, wordless, holding a covered tray, Wolfe's late-night indulgence. He set it down and disappeared like a ghost of domestic perfection. Wolfe lifted the lid. Pheasant pâté and toasted brioche. Typical for an evening that ended in confession and corpses. He served himself without comment, then spoke with that slow satisfaction that comes only after order has been restored. "Kramer will have his arrest, the newspapers their sensation, and the courts their illusion of closure. The rest is irrelevant." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning," he said. "The truth never expires as quickly as people do." That was Wolfe for an epitaph. I leaned back, watching him return to his meal, the glow from the desk lamp outlining his shape like a carving. He was still, immense, calm, the world's most sedentary storm. Eventually I said, "You know, that key on our stoop started this whole thing. Ever figure who actually placed it?" He looked up, eyes half-lidded but sharp. No, he said, nor do I intend to. Some mysteries serve better as reminders than as answers. I grinned. That's one way to dodge a loose end. Not at all, he said. Loose ends are the threads that keep us from believing the fabric is perfect. I prefer them visible. He reached for his book again, signaling the evening was officially over. I stood, stretched, and crossed to the door. "Good night, sir," I said. "Good night, Archie." "Bolt the door. We've had enough visitors for one lifetime." I did as told. Outside, the city had gone soft under a slow drizzle, the streets gleaming like something half erased. Inside, the brownstone was itself again, silent, exact, untouchable. The case was done, the coffee hot, the world spinning in its usual crooked circle. And as always, Nero Wolfe had returned it to balance, not with force or fury, but with words, sharp enough to draw blood, quiet enough to feel like truth. Kramer called again the next morning, earlier than was decent, even for a man who considered patience a misdemeanor. The sound of the phone jolted me out of a perfectly good dream about nothing in particular, and by the time I stumbled to it, Wolfe's voice was already audible from the other room, clipped and unwelcoming. He must have picked up his extension upstairs. I stayed on the line long enough to hear the gravel in Kramer's tone. "You can add clairvoyant to your resume, Wolfe. We pulled her car apart, found the residue, same oxidizer. Gloves, too. It's airtight." "Of course it is," Wolfe said, "but you didn't call to congratulate me." There was a pause, then Kramer growled, "No, I called because something still stinks." She didn't run, didn't even protest, sat there like she was waiting for applause. "That is not unusual," Wolfe said. "You mistake resignation for composure." "I mistake nothing," Kramer shot back. "She said one thing before we booked her. Tell Mr. Wolfe the key was only half the invitation." "What the hell does that mean?" There was a silence heavy enough to feel across the wire. Wolfe's voice, when it came, was quiet and deliberate. "It means, Inspector, that I am again being summoned. Good morning." He hung up. I waited for him to come down, which he did a few minutes later. No robe, no newspaper, just that expression he gets when curiosity has wrestled irritation to a draw. "So," I said, "apparently the key came with a +1. He grunted. "Miss Tolland continues to posture, even in captivity. It is consistent with her nature. She has not yet accepted defeat, only delay." "Maybe she's trying to rattle you," I said. "If she thinks you'll bite again." "She overestimates her novelty," he interrupted. "However, her phrasing was precise. Half the invitation, which implies a second token or a second party. Another player." He nodded slightly. "Someone who considered themselves an equal mind. That would explain the refinement of the initial acts, the symmetry of the clues, the theatrical restraint." "Then she wasn't alone." "Correct. She was the voice, not the architect." He leaned back, eyes narrowing, hands tented. "I have been watching the wrong stagehand." By noon, Saul Panzer was out following Dar again. Wolfe had reasoned that if there was another conspirator, Dar would know, or fear, something about them. I spent the afternoon juggling phone calls, pretending not to notice Wolfe pacing the office in 5-foot lines of controlled agitation. For a man who hated movement, he could make the floorboards earn their keep when his brain was running hot. At 4, Saul called. "Got him, Archie. Dar met with someone at a cafe near Bryant Park. Older man, gray suit, photographer's bag, name on the IT credit slip. Malcolm Fenn." "Never heard of him." "Neither had I," Saul said. "But get this, he used to run Verity Studios before Gifford. Retired 2 years ago, hasn't been seen since the fire." I whistled softly. "That's not retirement. That's a vanishing act." Saul agreed. "Want me to bring him in?" "Not yet," I said. "Let me feed it to Wolfe first." When I relayed the report, Wolfe went still, the kind of stillness that meant something had finally clicked. "Malcolm Fenn," he said softly. "The mentor, the one who taught Gifford." "Of course." He closed his eyes, speaking more to himself than to me. Gifford's technique, the composition, the lighting, those were signatures of an earlier hand. Fenn's hand. He was the aesthetic behind the message. Miss Tolland provided motive and means, but not art. The true author never left the frame. "Then Fenn's the one who planted the key?" "Undoubtedly," Wolfe said. "He wanted my attention, my analysis. To him, this was an exhibition, the perfect intellectual crime observed by a peer. Gifford was his apprentice, Tolland his sponsor, Locke his experiment, and I his audience." "Cute," I said. "And how do we send our regards to the artist?" Wolfe's mouth tightened. "By declining his encore." He reached for the phone. "Archie, call Kramer. Tell him to have Mr. Fenn detained quietly. No headlines, no fuss. If my inference is correct, he will already be waiting." Kramer's reaction was predictable disbelief, but 2 hours later, he called back. "We got him. Sitting in his apartment like he was expecting us, and Wolfe, he had a photograph on his desk. You and him, taken from across the street, dated 2 days ago." I felt the back of my neck prickle. "Guess he liked your profile, boss." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but the air in the room felt heavier. An artist who documents his observers. How fitting. Tell Kramer he may find that photograph valuable as evidence, and that I am done being anyone's subject. When Kramer hung up, the silence stretched again. I watched Wolfe stare at nothing for a full minute before he finally said, "Archie, there is a line between intellect and exhibitionism. Mr. Fenn crossed it gladly. Miss Tolland merely followed." "Guess that's what happens when brilliance gets bored," I said. He sighed, and for once it sounded almost human. "Yes, and boredom, Mr. Goodwin, is the most dangerous indulgence of all." The next morning, the papers ran with the story. Photographer and heiress in elaborate scheme. But the brownstone stayed quiet. Wolfe refused interviews, and I ignored reporters at the door. By noon, he was upstairs again, tending orchids, restoring the balance that crime and curiosity always disturbed. As for me, I sat in the office, staring at my typewriter, wondering how long it would be before someone else with too much imagination and too little. Conscience came knocking. The key still sat on Wolfe's desk, dull brass, unremarkable except for the memory it carried. He hadn't thrown it away. Neither had I. Some things you keep, not because you need them, but because they remind you that the world, for all its neat conclusions, never really locks shut. Claire Tolland's trial began 2 weeks later, but it wasn't the courtroom that finished her. By the time the papers printed their second headline, she'd already folded herself into silence, letting her lawyer speak for her. Kramer told me she looked calm, composed, the same way she had when she sat across from Wolfe that night. Only now there wasn't anything left for her to command. I didn't plan to see her again, but Wolfe did. The district attorney arranged a brief meeting. "For the record," they said. I think Kramer just wanted to watch Wolfe do what gravity does to falling objects. The room was bare. Grey walls, steel table, the kind of place where sound doesn't linger. Claire sat on one side, wrists resting lightly on the surface, eyes clear and sharp. Wolfe was opposite her, unmoved, massive, exact. I stood near the door, feeling like a witness at a chess match where one of the players hadn't realized the game was already over. She spoke first. "You came to see the monster, Mr. Wolfe?" He shook his head once. "Monstrosity implies impulse. Yours was calculation." She smiled faintly. "Then you approve?" "No," he said. "I understand. There is a difference. You sought control, not chaos. But control without conscience is simply vanity in formal wear." She tilted her head, studying him. "And what about you? You control people every day, through words, through deduction. You move them like pieces. How's that different? Wolfe's reply was soft, but it filled the room. Because I do not mistake the pieces for the board. Her smile faltered. For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually argue, but she didn't. She just sat back, looking past him at the empty wall, like she was trying to see what came after cleverness. When the guard came to take her, she rose with grace intact. Just before she turned, she said, "If I'd met you sooner, Mr. Wolfe, I might have done things differently." He inclined his head slightly. "If you had met me sooner, Miss Tolland, you might not have done them at all." She left without another word. Back at the brownstone, the city's noise seemed far away, like it had decided to give us one evening of silence out of respect. Wolfe went straight to his chair, sighed, and poured his beer. I waited, because there's always a line, the one he saves for the end. The observation that nails the coffin shut, not just on the case, but on the idea behind it. When he spoke, it was slow, even deliberate. Intellect, Archie, is a fine tool, but too often it serves appetite instead of reason. Miss Tolland believed she could design truth itself, prune it like a rosebush. But truth grows wild, always, I said. She didn't seem sorry. She wasn't, Wolfe replied. Regret is for those who doubt their premises. She had none. He took a sip of beer, then added, "That is why she failed. Not for what she did, but for what she never questioned." He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the quiet reclaim the room. The orchids upstairs waited for him, the city moved on, and the brownstone, our world, was itself again, contained, orderly, safe from the infection of drama. I sat there a while longer, watching him drift toward stillness, the light from the desk lamp turning his face into something both ancient and precise. Finally, I said, "You know, if you ever get tired of justice, you could write sermons." Without opening his eyes, he answered, "Justice is sermon enough, Mr. Goodwin." That was the last line of the night, and as always, it fit. 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 It fit.